Nowhere, because Will has something going on inside him. You do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words.
The year was 2022, the most watched awards show on the planet. 15 million viewers, one slap, and an industry that stood up and applauded. But here's what nobody warned Hollywood about. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from the journalists, the insiders, or the executives hiding behind closed doors. Sometimes the truth comes from the two men you least expected to agree on anything. One of them spent decades making the world laugh by disappearing into characters. The other has spent his entire career refusing to disappear at all. Jim Carrey, Katt Williams. Two comics from completely different worlds, different eras, and different survival playbooks. And yet, when the dust settled after the most controversial moment in Oscars history, these two men, independently, brutally, and without apology, pointed their fingers at the same thing. Not just at Will Smith, but at the machine behind Will Smith, the Hollywood machine that built him, protected him, and then scrambled to save him the moment he exposed himself on live television. What did Jim Carrey see that the room full of celebrities refused to acknowledge? What did Katt Williams, a man who has been warning the industry about its dark underbelly for years, say that made people go back and rewatch his interviews in a cold sweat? And why, when you line up their words side by side, does the picture become so much more disturbing than a single slap ever could? Stay with us, because this story goes deeper than the Oscars, deeper than Will Smith's career collapse. This is about who Hollywood truly protects and why, and what happens to the people who dare to say so out loud. The night that changed everything. To understand why Jim Carrey and Katt Williams' words hit so hard, you first have to go back to that stage. March 27, 2022, the 94th Academy Awards. Will Smith was riding the highest wave of his career. After decades of blockbusters, after years of cultivating one of the most carefully managed public images in Hollywood history, he was the frontrunner for Best Actor for his portrayal of Richard Williams in King Richard.
Richard Williams was a fierce defender of his family.
The beloved family man, the protective husband, the untouchable megastar who had generated nearly $9 billion at the global box office. That was the Avatar, and it had been decades in the making. Then, Chris Rock stepped to the microphone and made a joke comparing Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head to the movie G.I. Jane. The camera caught Will's face shift. What happened next was witnessed by everyone. A calm, deliberate walk to the stage, an open palm slap across Rock's face, a return to his seat, and then words that the broadcast struggled to censor. The audience froze. Some thought it was a bit, a rehearsed moment of celebrity theater, but it wasn't, and within seconds, the entire world knew it. Now ask yourself this: what do you do when one of Hollywood's biggest stars commits assault on live television in front of the entire planet? Apparently, you give him a standing ovation. That's exactly what happened. Will Smith won Best Actor that same night, and when he walked back to that stage, the same stage he had just assaulted a comedian on, most of that room rose to their feet, not in protest, not in silence, in applause. That standing ovation, that single collective moment of Hollywood choosing to look away, that is what lit the fuse under Jim Carrey, and it's what gave Katt Williams' long-standing warnings about the industry a terrifying new context. Because the slap was one man's moment of weakness, rage, and ego. But the standing ovation? That was institutional. That was the whole system showing you exactly what it's made of. Jim Carrey breaks. The philosophical verdict. 3 days after the ceremony, Jim Carrey appeared on CBS Mornings, and the man known for elastic faces, boundless energy, and characters that absorbed entire rooms decided to do something he almost never does in a talk show format. He got serious, and he got specific. Jim said he was deeply disturbed, not by the slap itself, though he made his position on that crystal clear, but by the room's response to it. The standing ovation, he explained, represented Hollywood exposing itself as a place that had lost its...
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless.
...backbone entirely. The industry had, in one synchronized moment of applause, revealed that it does not hold powerful people accountable. It protects them. Think about that for a second. Here's Jim Carrey, a man who was literally the biggest comedy draw on the planet in the 1990s, who has walked away from multi-million-dollar deals, who has openly rejected the Hollywood validation machine in interview after interview, calling out his own industry for being spineless. That's not a press release. That's not PR management. That is a man with nothing left to lose telling you what he actually sees. And he went further. Jim made it known that if he had been in Chris Rock's position, he would have announced the very next morning that he was suing Will Smith for $200 million. Not for the money, for the principle. Because the footage, as he pointed out, would live forever. It would follow Rock everywhere. And because the message had to be sent that no one, regardless of how famous, how beloved, or how many box office billions they have generated, has the right to walk onto a stage and physically strike someone for saying words. But here's the part of Jim's analysis that most coverage missed, the part that cuts the deepest and is the most disturbing in its accuracy. Jim Carrey didn't just talk about Will Smith's behavior. He diagnosed it. He offered a theory about what actually happened in that moment, not just an angry husband reacting to a joke about his wife, but something far more psychologically complex. Jim described Will as someone who had spent 30 years creating and maintaining an avatar, a constructed identity, the family man, the protector, the beloved star, a perfectly engineered public character designed for consumption, for likability, for maximum commercial appeal. And here's the thing about an avatar. It requires constant protection. It needs validation to survive. When Chris Rock made that joke about Jada's shaved head, the joke didn't just land on Will the human being. It landed on Will the brand. The joke cracked the avatar. And when an identity built on 30 years of performance suddenly feels threatened, something primal takes over. Jim knows this intimately. He spent years talking publicly about his own awakening, his realization that Jim Carrey the character was a cage. In a viral 2017 interview, he talked about reaching a point where he understood that his public persona was entirely separate from whoever he actually was underneath it. He described reaching a moment of separation where he asked himself, "Who is Jim Carrey?" And the answer he arrived at was that the character was thin to begin with, that it barely existed. This is what Jim saw in Will, a man so consumed by his avatar that when the avatar was punctured in front of 15 million viewers, he didn't have any tools left to handle it. No off switch. No separation between the real and the performed, just pure defensive instinct. Now here's the question you need to sit with. If an actor as self-aware and spiritually evolved as Jim Carrey sees a trapped man in Will Smith, what does that say about the industry that created the trap in the first place? Katt Williams and the industry's dark patterns. If Jim Carrey represented the philosophical lens on Will Smith's collapse, then Katt Williams represents something altogether more dangerous to the people in power. A man who has been consistent. For years, long before the slap, long before the public reckoning with Hollywood's protection networks, Katt Williams was saying things that made industry insiders deeply uncomfortable.
One of those persons turned out to be Ludacris, and the other person turned out to be Katt Williams.
He talked about control, about who gets to succeed and who gets suppressed, about the way certain narratives get managed, certain people get protected, and certain voices get dismissed as unstable or difficult when they dare to name what they are seeing. And here is the critical thing about Katt Williams's perspective that most people still underestimate. This is not someone ranting from the fringes. This is one of the most gifted stand-up comedians alive. A man with an extraordinary career built on observational precision and a refusal to sanitize the truth for comfortable audiences. When Katt talks about the entertainment industry, he is not theorizing. He is reporting. In his now legendary interview on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharpe, an interview that sent the internet into a genuine spiral, Katt laid out in extraordinary detail his view of how the industry works, who gets built up, who gets torn down, the unspoken contracts that come with certain levels of fame and institutional backing, the price tag attached to protection, the deals, financial, creative, personal, that certain performers allegedly make in exchange for access to the highest levels of entertainment stardom. Now set that framework against what we watched happen at the 94th Academy Awards, and ask yourself, does Jim Carrey's avatar theory and Katt Williams's power structure critique tell the same underlying story? because both men, from completely different angles, are arriving at the same uncomfortable destination. Will Smith did not become Will Smith alone. The Will Smith brand was constructed, protected, and sustained by an industry ecosystem that had enormous financial reasons to keep the image intact. When that image shattered, publicly, irreversibly, on the most watched night in Hollywood's calendar, the system panicked. The standing ovation was panic. Think about what the people in that room were actually applauding. They weren't applauding Will Smith's performance in King Richard. In that moment, they were applauding the continued viability of their investment. They were communicating, not to Will, but to each other and to the watching world, that this man still had the room, that the machine was still running, that $9 billion in box office returns doesn't disappear because of one bad night. Katt Williams has argued for years that when the industry decides someone is worth protecting, it will go to extraordinary lengths to maintain that protection, and go to equally extraordinary lengths to destroy anyone who threatens it. Janet Hubert found this out the hard way when she had her contract dispute with Will Smith on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in the early 1990s. She was branded difficult, blacklisted. Her career never recovered. Will's continued to ascend. The industry chose. And it chose again on Oscar night. It just chose out loud this time. The double standard, who Hollywood actually protects. Let's talk about the double standard. Because this is where Jim Carrey and Katt Williams' critiques connect in the most concrete and undeniable way. After the slap, a familiar question started circulating. What would have happened if this had been a lesser-known actor? What if it hadn't been Will Smith? The answer is obvious, and it's brutal.
Because Will has something going on inside him that's frustrated, and I wish him the best. I really do. I don't.
An unknown actor who commits assault on live television, broadcast to 15 million viewers with footage immediately available from multiple camera angles, would have been removed from the venue immediately. There would have been criminal charges. Their career would have been over before the night was out. The industry would have distanced itself in hours. Will Smith was allowed to stay for the rest of the ceremony. He accepted his award. He gave a tearful speech. He attended the Vanity Fair after-party. And when the Academy finally acted, their response was a 10-year ban from attending events, not from working, not from making films, just from showing up to award nights. 2 years later, he was starring in a $100 million Sony blockbuster. This is what Jim Carrey meant by spineless. This is what Katt Williams has been pointing at for years. The rules don't apply equally. The accountability is selective. It depends entirely on your box office value, your network connections, and the financial interests of the people who have invested in your continued success. And before anyone suggests that Will's career did suffer, yes, it did. His Q score dropped from 39 to 19 within 2 years. The Apple TV film Emancipation, which should have been a prestige slam dunk, was quietly buried. Netflix paused a greenlit project. Studios adopted a wait-and-see approach. But here's the thing. That consequence wasn't driven by principle. It was driven by risk calculation. Studios didn't distance themselves from Will because assault is wrong. They did it because Will had temporarily become a liability. The moment Bad Boys Ride or Die performed well enough at the box office, his agents were back on the phone to studio executives, and the conversation shifted from consequence to comeback. The morality is financial. The accountability has a price point, and Katt Williams has been saying this, with receipts, with names, with specifics, for long enough that the industry has spent years trying to dismiss him as erratic rather than engage with what he's actually saying. Do you see the pattern? Anyone who says something that threatens the machine gets labeled difficult, unstable, a liability. The label changes, but the function is the same. Discredit the messenger so you never have to address the message. Eddie Murphy, the third voice in the room. Before we go further, we need to acknowledge the third powerful voice that entered this conversation because it adds a crucial dimension that both Jim's and Katt's perspectives reinforce. Eddie Murphy, a man who spent decades in quiet separation from Hollywood's award circuit and political theater. When Eddie stepped to the microphone at the 2023 Golden Globes to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award, the room was already braced. And Eddie delivered one of the most surgical pieces of comedy as commentary in recent memory. Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mouth.
Pay your taxes,
mind your business and keep Will Smith's wife's name.
The room laughed nervously. Of course they did. It was funny, but it was also precise. And backstage, Eddie confirmed it came from a place of genuine feeling. He knew everyone involved, he respected them all, and he still chose the biggest stage available to him to say, clearly and publicly, that what Will did was wrong. Eddie Murphy's relationship with Hollywood accountability is personal and deeply painful. At the 2007 Academy Awards, Eddie was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Dreamgirls. When he lost, he left the ceremony. For nearly 20 years, the narrative was that he had stormed out like a sore loser. Almost 2 decades later, Eddie explained what actually happened. He wasn't going to sit there and be the sympathy figure for the rest of the night, receiving consolation pats from Clint Eastwood and everyone else who wanted to perform comfort at him. He opted out of the performance. That's the same thing he was calling Will to do. Stop performing. Stop protecting the image. Own what happened and deal with it honestly. And Eddie has his own scars from speaking honestly. He believes his 1988 Oscars speech, where he called out Hollywood's failure to properly recognize black talent, effectively got him blacklisted from serious awards consideration for years afterward. Robin Williams warned him backstage not to go there. Eddie said it anyway, and he paid for it. So when Eddie Murphy stands up at an awards show and publicly calls out Will Smith, you understand the full weight of it. This is a man who has lived through the industry's retaliatory silence. He knows exactly what it costs to say the uncomfortable thing in the wrong room, and he said it anyway. The marriage lie. The avatar expands. Jim Carrey's avatar theory becomes even more devastating when you factor in what Jada Pinkett Smith revealed in October 2023 during the promotion of her memoir, Worthy. She and Will had been separated since 2016. Read that again. Since 2016. 6 years before the Oscars incident. 6 years before Will Smith walked onto that stage to physically defend her honor in front of the world. The infamous 2020 Red Table Talk episode, where Jada discussed her entanglement with August Alsina, happened while they were already separated. The tears, the sit-down, the public processing of what appeared to be a marriage in crisis. It was all performed for cameras about a relationship that had already ended in private, and every family photo, every joint appearance, every carefully curated moment of Will and Jada presenting their love story to the world, a performance. And then 2022 arrived, the Oscars, the joke about Jada's shaved head, and Will, who in any authentic version of his life would have been processing the fact that his marriage had effectively been over for 6 years, chose to walk onto a stage and assault someone in the name of protecting a woman whose primary role in his life at that point was as a feature of his public image.
Uh-oh, Richard! Oh, wow!
Katt Williams has talked at length about the way Hollywood relationships and marriages can become part of the brand machinery, how the performance of domesticity, the performance of love and family and stability serves a function for certain types of celebrity image. The beloved family man is a character. It's commercially valuable. It makes you approachable. It makes you safe. It makes you the kind of star that brands want, and studios back and audiences project their own aspirations onto. Will and Jada's relationship was, for a very long time, a pillar of his brand identity. And when that pillar was publicly wobbled by a joke at the Oscars, the avatar didn't calculate rationally. It just defended. Jada herself, speaking to the Today Show, said she was confused, that it was out of character, that she didn't know what was happening. Whether you take that at face value or not, the public record now shows a picture of a man so thoroughly merged with a performed identity that he was defending a marriage that no longer existed in the way the world believed it did. Jim Carrey's avatar theory wasn't just insightful, it was prophetic. Chris Rock, the human being in the crossfire. Somewhere in the middle of all the Hollywood power analysis and philosophical breakdowns, there's a human being who got hit. Chris Rock. Nearly a year after the slap, Rock released his Netflix special Selective Outrage, filmed live at the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore. And for the first time, he spoke at length and without restraint about what happened and what it did to him. He didn't perform victimhood. In fact, he explicitly rejected the framing. "I'm not a victim," he said. "You will never see me crying on Oprah," but he also didn't pretend the impact wasn't real. He still had ringing in his ears. The physical and emotional weight of what happened on that stage didn't disappear because he kept working. He went back to work the next day. He continued touring globally. He did not press charges, but the wound was there. What Selective Outrage did, beyond the catharsis of comedy, was reframe the entire incident from Rock's perspective. He dismissed the idea that the slap was about a husband defending his wife. He named the real source of Will's selective outrage, the unresolved humiliation Will had experienced as a result of the public entanglement revelation and everything surrounding his marriage. The joke about Jada's hair wasn't what broke Will. It was the final crack in a dam that had been straining for years. Rock also revealed something that speaks directly to the question of industry protection and unspoken rules. He tried to reach out to Will after the incident to offer condolences. Will Smith never returned the call. Think about what that says. Not about Will as a person necessarily, but about the state someone has to be in when they cannot even respond to an outstretched hand from the man they publicly assaulted. Whether through shame, through the advice of his legal team, through the fog of whatever crisis was unfolding privately, Will Smith was unreachable, locked inside the consequence of the Avatar's collapse. Rock's special also did something else important. It gave the audience permission to hold two thoughts simultaneously, to acknowledge that the joke landed badly on Jada's alopecia, and to be absolutely clear that regardless of the content of words, nobody has the right to physically assault someone on a stage, or anywhere. Words are not violence. A slap on the face is violence. That line, as Rock himself would note during later tour appearances alongside Kevin Hart, should not need to be complicated. The lawsuit, another layer of darkness. Just when Hollywood thought the story had reached its final chapter, Bad Boys performed, the comeback narrative was tentatively being written, another storm arrived. In 2025, violinist Brian King Joseph filed a lawsuit against Will Smith in Los Angeles County Superior Court. The allegations were serious and deeply disturbing. Joseph, who had been hired to perform on Will's Based on a True Story 2025 tour, claimed he was fired in retaliation after reporting a deeply alarming incident that occurred while on tour in Las Vegas. According to the lawsuit, Joseph returned to his hotel room to find it had been entered without his consent. Inside were items he did not recognize: wipes, a beer bottle, a backpack, a bottle of HIV medication, and hospital discharge paperwork bearing another person's name. There was also a handwritten note addressed directly to him, apparently written by whoever had entered the room, suggesting a private encounter and implying they planned to return. Joseph was alarmed. He contacted hotel security. He photographed the items. He notified tour management and reported the incident through proper channels, including local law enforcement. Hotel security told him there were no signs of forced entry, and that the only people who should have had access to his room were members of the management team handling accommodations. Rather than investigate the incident seriously, tour management, according to the lawsuit, dismissed Joseph's concerns and accused him of fabricating the story. Shortly after reporting what happened, he was terminated. He was told the production was moving in a different direction. A replacement violinist was hired almost immediately. The lawsuit further alleges that Will was directly involved in the decision to fire Joseph, and that Joseph had been deliberately groomed and psychologically primed by patterns of behavior during the tour, though the filing does not allege specific acts beyond the Las Vegas incident. Joseph subsequently shared a video on Instagram describing what happened in general terms, careful not to name Will directly given the active legal proceedings, but describing the opportunity he had been given, the pride he felt at working with someone described only as huge in the industry, and the devastating way it had ended. Will Smith's legal team has categorically denied every allegation. His attorney described the claims as false, baseless, and reckless, and promised aggressive legal action in response. The case is ongoing. No verdict has been reached. But here's what Katt Williams and Jim Carrey's frameworks invite us to notice. The pattern described in this lawsuit, if the allegations carry any truth, follows a recognizable shape. The shape of someone who has operated with institutional protection for so long that they develop a sense of behavioral impunity. The shape of an industry that reflexively protects the valuable and dismisses the powerless. The shape of a machine that has been running the same way for a very long time. Whether or not the allegations are proven, the lawsuit exists. It was filed. It is now part of the public record, and it arrived on top of everything else. The career autopsy. Where Will Smith stands today. Let's be precise about the numbers, because the numbers tell a story that Hollywood's PR ecosystem cannot fully manage. Before the Oscars incident, Will Smith's Q score, the industry's measurement of both recognizability and emotional appeal, sat at 39, one of the highest in the entire entertainment industry. He was not just a box office draw, he was a loved box office draw. By August 2022, 6 months after the slap, that score had fallen to 24. By early 2024, it had dropped to 19. In 2 years, Will Smith went from being in the upper tier of globally beloved stars to having one of the lowest Q scores among major Hollywood actors. The emancipation situation told the real story of the industry's response.